insufficient connection between legal aspects of housing and other aspects of housing, the dearth of systematic comparative research on housing law internationally, no such critical comparison of findings using defined parameters and scales to indicate countries' position in comparative terms and suggesting parameters for new legislation, and most contemporary comparative studies of constitutions focus on the political and judicial decisions, a legal analysis, while we are doing an interdisciplinary study incorporating what we call housing studies. The research questions we defined. What conceptions of housing rights are reflected in the text of the constitutions? What are the similarities, the differences, common denominators? What conceptions of housing rights and state obligations are reflected in the text of international covenants and agreements? What is the relation between these housing rights at the international level and national level? Are there additional criteria by which one may evaluate various conceptions of housing rights? This is a pretentious goal. What aspects of housing are less commonly referred to? And are there new aspects that haven't been looked at that are important part of housing studies? How important is the constitutionalization of housing rights for de facto policy as perceived by stakeholders? Have not yet arrived to the interviews, and I'm skeptic that will, because it's a pretty wide dissertation already. So what we do to build the theoretical background, we looked at both housing studies on one side and constitutional right theory, a bit of understanding what rights mean, what rights are, and a general survey of the world constitutions. So this is our world today: 205 self-defined states, 193 UN member states. There are 204 national constitutions, including islands, and 188 UN member states that have constitutions. This is a timeline of the world constitutions. So you may see I incorporated, well, here you see the date where the constitutions were started to be implemented. Don't have here the amendments that took place along the years. And these are the countries who actually have a right to housing within their constitution. 62 countries where we found clauses that talk about a right to housing or mention housing as a duty of the state. If we had to place it on a map, this is the status of the right to housing in the world at the moment. See if you can identify your own countries. Some of the criteria we looked at within the housing studies are here listed. We incorporated, for example, criteria set by comment number 4 of the United Nations, the International Covenant on Social, Economic, and Cultural Rights. So you may see, for example, at the last column to the right, adequacy, decency, habitability, affordability, accessibility, all these big keywords that are difficult to interpret. From that little classification, we arrived to a much wider number of criteria by which we could classify these clauses, including, for example, the width of the right. Who are the people who are entitled according to this right? We didn't look at interpretation or case law. We looked just at the simple phrasing, the wording that is within the Constitution. For example, who is responsible for providing the right? Are there any procedural regulations on how this right should be provided, and so on? I want to show a few examples of the very, very latest constitutions that have entered in force. You can see in the last column 2012, 2011, and I might show another 2007. Mali, for example, just legislated a new constitution. They had a revolution that produced a new constitution. You may see in 1992, they used to have, in the old constitution, some kind of anchoring of housing, logement, in red. I do want to mention that the constitutions I collected were collected only from official websites. These are official translations. And I'm also fluent in several languages, so I've read several of the constitutions in the original language to be able to understand better what the meanings are. There's a bit of problem that I'm aware of with the translation. Not always you can understand the full meaning of the words, and sometimes the word change with the translation, or not. The term might mean another thing. This is something we're aware of and we're trying to be careful with. Anyway, in 2012, with the new constitution in place, housing was simply removed out of the constitution. There's no other clause in the constitution that mentions housing, except for housing as privacy and freedom of residence, which is a different thing. Another example, which is quite conflictive, is Hungary. Another recent constitution, fundamental law, in 2011. They inserted this clause: Hungary shall strive to provide every person with decent housing and access to public services. This right, if I may call it, is framed within the section of freedom and responsibility. Of course, there's lots of conflict regarding this constitution. Lots of headlines. I've been collecting Google alerts for over 3 years. Every time there's the right to housing, I get an alert, and every time there's a new constitution, I get an alert. So I got lots of alerts on this issue of the new constitution of Hungary. However, I didn't get any alert whatsoever about the incorporation of this right. And for example, UN Habitat was not even aware of this this new article. Whether it does imply a full right to housing or not, we'll be happy. I have here a representative from Hungary who was arguing. The last example I will show from another developing country is Nepal, the interim constitution. The phrasing was pretty much preserved from the 1990 constitution to the 2007 constitution. This right, if I may call it, is framed within the section of responsibilities, directive principles, and policies of the state, more as a duty of the state than a right of the people. Well, you may read the two clauses and see the difference. It's practically a shopping list. I opted to show this, these few articles. There are many more articles, and I guess you're probably familiar with the articles of your own constitutions in the countries where you do have this kind of legislation. My personal favorite, who I didn't add in this presentation, but it's Portugal, who has a very, very extensive legislation, including some procedural measures on how to implement it, right? And just to give you a little insight into some of the preliminary findings, this is more or less the proportion of different terms that are incorporated into this legislation. So you may see, you may like this data accessibility to all has a pretty big percentage of repetition within this, among these rights. Okay. Yeah, I'm not aware of my time.
We trust you.
Sorry?
We trust you.
I was told we're going to be a hippie community on this session. So. Okay, so I will conclude here anyhow. We still have a few steps ahead to conclude this research. Yeah, I'm just, yeah, still don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but it will come. Actually, I did want to mention that constitutions in Egypt, in Zimbabwe, Fiji, Libya, where else? A few more countries are now in process of being legislated, and I think. I don't know, there's a lot of controversy on whether this legislation is efficient or not, if it's just a bunch of empty words or it doesn't have a meaning. But I think it would be interesting to get involved and to foresee these countries who are in this legislation process, and especially for NGOs to get involved and try to influence and incorporate these rights into the new constitutions that are taking place. I know that UN Habitat is not doing such things at the moment. So I guess this is it for, thank you.